Not long ago, I told you about the frog army bred by a TikTok user. Well, it turns out nature has things even scarier and, dare I say, more intriguing, since these are natural phenomena. This is a common jellyfish from the Ulmaridae family. And here's an unobtrusive reminder to drop a like. They're unassuming species that live in the coastal waters of temperate and tropical seas. But don't you think there's just a lot of jellyfish here? For one particular spot, I mean? This isn't just a coincidence. It happens because all these jellyfish simply were born at the same time. The right moment came with the right temperature and underwater currents, plus plenty of plankton, which is the main food for the common jellyfish. By late summer, plankton reaches its peak concentration, and then the jellyfish start to gather. There's so many of them that it's hard to count, but at least 100,000, and that's according to the most conservative estimates. In recent decades, we've been seeing more and more instances of massive jellyfish swarms popping up around the world. Sometimes these swarms cover hundreds of square miles of ocean. While it might seem like a spectacular display of nature's grandeur, having so many jellyfish in one place actually has some serious consequences. For starters, it's a real danger to tourists, especially if these jellyfish sting hard. Fewer tourists means economic damage. Also, jellyfish clog fishing nets or eat eggs and larvae of fish, and that means environmental damage in addition to economic. Think back to 2007 when a huge swarm of jellyfish practically decimated a salmon farm in Northern Ireland. Diamond extraction and even nuclear power plants are affected too. The abundance of jellyfish is causing pipes to clog, bringing machinery to a standstill. It's not surprising considering that in most cases a dense swarm consists of several creatures in 35 cubic feet of water. But in extreme cases, there could be more jellyfish than water, and that's a real disaster. Instances of power outages caused by jellyfish concentration in water are actually quite common, even if you haven't heard of them. The first recorded power outage due to jellyfish occurred in Australia in 1937, when they clogged the cooling pipes of a coal power plant. A similar incident in 1999 led to a power outage affecting 40 million people in the Philippines. In 2005 and 2013, jellyfish clogged the intake pipes of a nuclear power plant in Sweden, resulting in the shutdown of one of the reactors, which provided 10% of the country's electricity. In 2022, there was a massive sighting of jellyfish in the Mediterranean Sea, not far from the port city of Haifa in northern Israel. The water was swarming with these little white blobs, and the swarm of jellyfish stretched below the surface for hundreds of feet. Can you imagine just how many jellyfish were there? Because I sure can't. Israeli marine ecologists emphasize that a surge in jellyfish populations could wreak havoc on the marine ecosystem, posing risks to fishermen and ordinary beachgoers who are urged to stay out of the water to avoid stings. There were so many jellyfish that they could, no, not shut off the electricity, but something much worse, clog up the desalination plants used to replenish the country's water supply. Naturally, with this threat on the horizon, people began to wonder, why are there suddenly so many jellyfish? And guess who's responsible for the rise in jellyfish populations? Many human activities contribute to jellyfish proliferation, like digging the Suez Canal, polluting the sea with sewage, changing the climate, and harming predators that usually keep jellyfish numbers in check. Japanese fishermen are really struggling with jellyfish. All they want to do is what fishermen do best: catch fish. But instead, they end up hauling in nets full of jellyfish that are totally useless for eating or selling. In Alaska, there are jellyfish swarms too. And here, they also waited for the right temperature and currents, but there's another factor: salmon spawning. During this period, the water is practically teeming with salmon roe, like soup, and jellyfish simply have to grab the food. They don't even need to put in any effort. In the late 2000s, scientists were seriously concerned that jellyfish would take over the world's oceans, becoming the dominant species. And with humans continuing to impact the planet, it doesn't seem like the invasion of aggressive jellies will stop anytime soon. The one hero who can really save us is the sea turtle. Thanks to them, our oceans aren't 90% jellyfish by now because turtles eat them. Take the leatherback turtle, for example. It's basically living on a jellyfish diet, munching through about 16,000 calories a day. That's a whole lot of jellyfish. And we owe turtles big time for keeping those numbers in check. And this is the straw-colored fruit bat, a bat-like creature living and breeding in Africa. Its mating season spans from April to June, with babies born in February and March. Sometimes females delay pregnancy until October, then somehow sync up to give birth around the same time. Why? Nobody knows. In October, they flocked to Zambia's Kasanka National Park, and scientists have no idea why. But it looks impressive. Every year, straw-colored fruit bats swarm the park, reaching their peak numbers by November. But come January, they're nowhere to be found. Besides the obvious question, why are they doing this? Scientists are also trying to figure out just how many bats gather in Kasanka Park. The problem is there are a lot of them, and they fly really fast. It seems like counting them is just impossible. The visual estimates varied wildly from 1 to 10 million. Thankfully, modern technology came to the rescue, and an AI was created to tackle this task. A team of scientists and park rangers hurried around the park to set up a bunch of cameras just in time for the bat flight. Over 5 days, they recorded about 45 hours of footage. It'd be impossible for anyone to watch all of it and count the bats on the video. Artificial intelligence accomplished a task in just 50 hours that would have taken a human over 13 years. And even then, it might have driven them crazy. Thanks to AI, scientists finally determined that 987,114 bats flew past the cameras. And this, honestly, at first it looked like people were standing chest deep in mice, like some kind of Plague Tale trailer. But no, it turns out it's a bunch of frogs. So many that you could gather them into bags with your bare hands. But what on earth is this? Where could such an enormous number of frogs come from? We found the place. In the city of Longyan in southern China, breeders keep thousands of frogs in large tanks. They raise these frogs for food, as they're the main ingredient in a dish popular in China, Malaysia, and Thailand. On farms like these, you can have up to 15,000 frogs, and there are plenty of these farms around. In some provinces, there are around 1,000 frog farms, and collectively they can house up to 70 million frogs. It's incredible to think that there are places on Earth with hordes of frogs. 70 million! To put that in context, if those frogs were people, they'd outnumber the entire population of the United Kingdom. How does such a large number of frogs come about? Let me explain. Although there's almost no information on the internet about Chinese frogs and Chinese frog farms, we can look at commercial frog farming in the United States as an example. Yes, it's a real industry here too. On these farms, they breed bullfrogs. Clusters of eggs float on the water surface and often cover about 4.3 square feet. Typically, a female lays between 10,000 and 25,000 eggs, with 20,000 being pretty common. That's a huge number. Since they maintain a 1-to-1 ratio of females to males, breeding isn't an issue, and the farms end up with an insane amount of eggs. They hatch in about 1 to 3 weeks, depending on the water temperature, and it usually takes 2 to 3 years for a frog to reach a marketable size. So all this frog apocalypse scene I showed you, that's the stage where the adult frogs are being prepared for transport and sale. These small dark spots you see in the water are actually 6-foot-long sharks. Aerial photos and videos captured an incredible scene where around 10,000 black-tipped sharks are migrating along the shores of Palm Beach, Florida. Yes, that's a huge number. But there's no need to fear these sharks. Yes, they're close to the shore, so it's best not to throw rocks into the water in a situation like this. You might hit a shark for sure. Sharks actually migrate periodically, which is just a natural thing they do. But typically, they prefer to stay away from people, like most wild animals do. Typically, sharks migrate during spring and journey along the shores of Georgia and the Carolinas, where females give birth and in summer, they mate. Afterwards, as the number of sharks gets even bigger, they head back to Florida. It's all because of the cooler weather. However, when you step onto the beach and notice that the shallow waters are swarming with sharks, like a container full of frogs, thoughts of seasonal changes are the last thing on your mind. To be honest, my first reaction would be, damn, sharks! So that's why Florida beaches had to be closed during shark migration and people were forbidden from entering the water. Hold on, didn't I say we didn't have to fear them? Well, actually, sometimes these black-tipped sharks do bite people along the Florida coast, although it rarely ends fatally. Usually, black-tipped sharks are wary of humans and try to keep their distance. If they do happen to approach someone, it's usually younger ones, and they're likely just curious about what's in front of them swimming. But of course, that's no reason to go swimming in shark-infested waters near the shore, especially since the sharks there are heading out to mate. You know what's interesting? Sharks aren't the only ones who like to hang out in groups. Take, for example, the scalloped hammerhead shark. They gather around Darwin's Arch in the Galapagos Islands for a mating ritual. In the middle of this odd gathering are the females, while the males have to navigate through a crowd of younger sharks. It's like a challenge for the right to carry on the lineage. It's kinda weird how scalloped hammerhead sharks always seem to gather in large groups, and sometimes it's just not clear what they're up to. Unlike nearly all other shark species, these are highly social creatures. They gather in groups of hundreds, but nobody knows why. They're hard to study because scalloped hammerhead sharks travel long distances, constantly on the move, and stay deep down below. Only gathering spots offer researchers a rare opportunity to observe these sharks up close and gain some insight into their behavior. Take, for instance, a photo of these sharks in shallow waters. People assumed they were resting after hunting. And how do you like this? Hundreds of hammerhead sharks gather around an ancient volcano in the Pacific Ocean because they're drawn to secret signals from the ocean floor. Scientists still don't know why so many sharks travel across oceans and gather in the same place every year. They just show up. Every summer for the past decade, a large group of female hammerhead sharks has gathered around 2 atolls in French Polynesia. Scientists have a few theories about why this happens, but none of them seem quite convincing. It feels like sharks have their own unique traditions and celebrations that we just can't fully grasp. The Falkland Islands are the most important habitat for black-browed albatrosses, hosting about 70% of the global population, which is around 500,000 pairs. Scientists count them in pairs because the albatrosses come here to breed, usually arriving in September and leaving by the end of April. The nest, used year after year, is a sturdy column up to 20 inches tall made of mud and guano, sometimes with other materials. The black-browed albatross lays only 1 egg, and the young birds quickly spread north to southern Brazil, not returning to breed in their colony for 7 to 10 years. They can afford this long wait since albatrosses are known for their longevity, with black-browed albatrosses living over 50 years. Even so, there are still tons of birds on the Falkland Islands. The largest colony of black-browed albatrosses in the world, located on Steeple Jason Island, was first censused in December 1987. High-altitude aerial photos estimated the colony covered 79 acres. There were between 196,600 and 232,700 nests in the area, with about 153,200 to 178,400 of them occupied by breeding pairs during hatching season. It's been many years, yet the albatross population hasn't dwindled much. Actually, such large groups can be potentially dangerous. On the islands where black-browed albatrosses nest, there aren't any predators like cats or rats. Historically, these predators have never lived there, so the birds are thriving. But look at Midway Atoll. It has no connection to the Falkland Islands, yet Laysan albatrosses nest there. They come to mate, lay eggs, and wait for their chicks to hatch. Everything was fine until 2015 when volunteers started noticing bloody wounds on the birds. The injuries were caused by mice. They chewed through their skin, muscles, and fat. Most wounds were on the albatrosses' necks, backs, and sometimes under their wings. People introduced mice to the atoll during World War II, but the rodent showed no interest in the birds for decades. Then something changed, and scientists still don't know why. Birds die from their injuries, and albatrosses, in particular, tend to stay put despite getting hurt, resulting in many wounds. If their nesting area is disturbed, it could be catastrophic for the Laysan albatrosses, with 70% of the species at risk of dying out. Oh, here's some more disturbing news. A few years ago, a mysterious disease was discovered on the Falkland Islands that started killing off chicks. They all showed the same symptoms: discharge seeping from the eyes, swelling around their beaks, and trouble lifting their heads. Once these symptoms appeared, the chicks had only a couple of days left to live. It quickly became clear that it was some kind of infection, although scientists still don't know exactly what it is. The high population density is causing it to spread too fast. You know how it goes. But let's talk about something good. The world's largest nesting site for green turtles. Around 64,000 individuals was spotted during migration off the coast of Rain Island in northeastern Australia. Sometimes up to 100,000 nesting females are drawn to the coral reef, where about 90% of the region's green turtles are born. This is really great news because green turtles were once endangered in this area, but humans managed to save and restore the population. According to data from January 2022, a whopping 640,000 turtle hatchlings appeared on the reef of Rain Island. Now, just because they hatch doesn't mean they'll make it, considering they're tiny turtles. Still, it's a huge step forward. What's really odd is that people played a part in this. See, this island used to be smaller, and there were so many turtles that they just couldn't nest. there wasn't enough space for them. Then 1,400,000 cubic feet of sand were moved to raise the beaches. The number of nesting areas was doubled. 1,200,000 cubic feet of beach were reprofiled. They even set up 5,700 feet of fencing to prevent turtles from falling off cliffs and getting hurt. Overall, people really put in a lot of effort, and if turtles could, they'd surely thank them. Before you go, don't forget to hit the like button. See you later.